Hey guys, today we're gonna talk about status trigger for bow. It's the gold Raytheon set bonus. So we're gonna talk about this skill and what I think about it. I was pretty excited to test this skill because the concept seems pretty fun and I wanted to see how it compares to current meta sets. So I'll tell you at the end what I think about it, but first we're gonna explain what this skill does exactly. Then I'm gonna show you the build that I used, and then I'm gonna tell you how it compares to other sets. So first off, what does status trigger do exactly? So if you didn't know, when a weapon has a status, so for example a blast bow, not every hit is gonna inflict status. So for bow, 1 out of 3 arrows is gonna inflict blast. This is true for bow, but this is true for every weapons, even melee weapons, they're gonna inflict status only 1 out of 3 hits. Now what status trigger does is that after a perfect evade for a short time, you're gonna inflict status with every hit. So instead of applying status every 3 arrows, you're gonna inflict status every single arrow. So during this short time, your status application will be a lot higher. And just so you know, it does not work on coatings because coatings by default already apply status with every single arrow. So this is only gonna be useful for blast bow, and that's it when it comes to bow. Now let's take a look at the build that I've been using for status trigger. For spread, I've been using the Blood Orange Bishaten bow because that's the only blast spread bow. But if you prefer to play rapid, you can either play the Teostra bow or the Magnamalo bow. For Pierce, the Pyrakna bow is also a very decent option. All you have to do if you play Pierce and Rapid is to switch the spread decoration for Force Shot and Pierce decoration. That's the exact same build. Now for the armor, we're gonna use the helmet of Golden Raytheon. That's because it's very efficient, and for the waist we want to use the Scored Magnamalo waist. Now you may be wondering why I don't have any blast attack on this build. It's because, as we'll see in a little bit, the blast procs actually don't do a lot of damage at all. So for these blast bow builds, I know it can seem weird, but we're actually gonna be focusing on raw damage instead of the actual blast damage. And that's why for the arms we're gonna be using the Lucent Nagakuga arms that have Adrenaline Rush, which is a nice raw boost. And for the waist we're gonna be using the Sinister Waist, which is also a nice raw boost. And for the legs we're gonna use the Arc Legs because Bloodlust is a very good skill and we don't want to skip on it. Now when it comes to Cryo Augment, I strongly encourage you to put as much raw skills as you can. Attack boost is your first priority, try to get at least attack boost 4. If you really want to put some blast attack you can, but I wouldn't recommend to focus on it, but you can do as you want. Now we're gonna take a look at how this build compares to the other builds. So we're gonna compare it to the raw builds, we're gonna compare it to the safe elemental builds, and we're gonna compare it to the suicide elemental builds. Now here's my first issue with the blast bows. The raw on the blast bows is about the same as the raw for the elemental bows. That means that on the same fight, for the blast bows to be equivalent to the elemental bows, the blast needs to be about the same damage as the elemental bows at the end of the fight, which is far from being the case. So here's the testing that I've been doing. I took a monster that has average hit zone values, so I took Seregios because his hit zones are pretty average. He has a pretty average raw hit zone and a pretty average kind of low elemental hit zone, so it should favor blast bows and is pretty weak to blast. Now thankfully on PC we have some tools that lets us calculate our damage a bit easier, and I did about 10 fights per set on Seregios, and I calculated the average damage per arrow on all of those sets. So this is not very scientific, but this is gonna give you a rough idea of how blast performs compared to other sets. I also removed as much RNG as I could, so no pets, no marksman, no ball boost. All the RNG that I could remove, I removed, so the results are as accurate as possible. And as you can see, blast bow consistently finished dead last with about 62 damage per arrow on average, and that's including the blast procs. Okay, so I did calculate the blast procs into this. Raw bow was second to last at 66, about 66 damage on average. And the safe build without health drain and without bloodlust was at 70, and the suicide build was at 75. So there is a pretty significant difference between the elemental builds and the blast builds. And there's a few reasons for that. The first reason is that the blast procs don't do a lot of damage. On most monsters, the blast procs will do about 200 damage, which if you calculate all the blast procs in the fight, that's not a lot at all. At most, you're gonna get 25 to 30 blast procs. At the very maximum, 30 blast procs is 6,000 damage. When you look at the endgame monsters, like the afflicted monsters that have about 90,000 health, 6,000 damage is not a lot at all. It's like 6-7%. And I know you can increase the damage of the blast procs with the Teostra Rampage decoration, but you'll be doing way more damage by using the anti-species decorations. Not only that, but all of these numbers have been tested in solo. As soon as you use that in multiplayer, it's gonna get a lot worse. And that's because the monsters in multiplayer have a higher threshold for status, so it's gonna take more arrows to get the blast procs. So in the same fights with the same set, you're gonna get a lot less blast procs than in solo, so it gets worse in multiplayer for blast. Now, I also tested for very short fights, because blast is very front loaded. That means that you're gonna get most of your blast procs at the beginning of the fights, and very quickly you're gonna get less and less blast procs. So for very short fights, blast procs is gonna get more value. But even then, even for very short fights, it was barely catching up to raw bows, and it was still way under elemental bows. So there's not much to gain by playing a blast bow. Now, when it comes to bow and rise, I always said that this weapon is so strong in this game that even if you play a build that's subpar, you're still gonna do a ton of damage. So if you feel like this build is fun for you, by all means, please use it. It's completely fine. You're still gonna do a ton of damage. But if you don't care about playing blast and you just want to do the most damage possible, blast will never be the best option. As far as I tested, I've never had a situation where blast was even remotely the best option. Now, what I would like to see in the next updates, maybe if they give us a blast bow that has higher roll, this will be enough to compete with the elemental bows on monsters that don't take a lot of elemental damage. But as it is right now, the blast bows just don't do enough raw damage to compete with elemental at all. So overall, I'm pretty disappointed. I was really hoping that it would be good in some niche situations, but maybe in the future. But that's gonna be it for the video. Please let me know if you want me to cover anything else. I've been slowing down a little bit the content lately because I'm a bit burnt out with Rise this last couple of weeks. So I'm just gonna slow down until the next starter update. If you have any questions, as usual, left it in the comment sections and I'll try to answer it. Alright, see you next time.